Good evening and welcome to tonight's Common Council meeting for March 31st, 2015. Clerk will call the roll, please.
Hanson.
Present.
Fowler.
Here.
Sedlacek.
Present.
Markham.
Here.
Williams.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Fernsler.
Here.
Hildebrand.
Here.
Let the record show we have a quorum. Next item is the pledge. Please stand. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is item 3, approval of the consent agenda. Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved, Alder Markham. Second, Hildebrand.
We have a first and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Clerk will call the roll.
Hildebrand.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Markham.
Yes.
Fowler.
Yes.
Fernsler.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Sedlacek. Hanson.
Yes.
Motion carried. Thank you. Next item is the audience portion where we ask people to sign in and be recognized by the chair. This is where you do the talking and we do the listening. And tonight, our first person that signed up is Ron Lottie. Mr. Lottie?
Honorable Mayor and council members, I came to speak in regards to your ordinance, first ordinance of 2015, creating a clear water thing. Oh, should I start over?
Go right ahead.
Creating the clear water ordinance, ordinance 1 of 2015. I think it's unfair homes built prior to sump pump ordinance are required to come into compliance with that ordinance. Homes built at that time were all built according to the building code at the time. And now you're changing the building code and you're gonna go back and penalize these people, which could cost them a lot of money to come into compliance. And this will affect every sale of every property in the city of Plymouth, not only homeowner, but every property. And then I feel that if the city wants to pursue this ordinance, then the city has to lead the way. You have to go back and look at your manholes on the sanitary sewers. There are numerous ones below grade. I know of a few right off the hand. South Milwaukee Street is one. The water just pours in these things because they dip down on the manhole and they're not sealed. The water pours in these manholes. So I think that the city should really look at that ordinance. And my personal feeling is the people that built according to the building code before the sump pump ordinance was put in effect should be grandfathered into this thing. And that's my feeling on the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lottie. Next person that signed up is Bill Emig. Bill?
Good evening. Just want to let the council know and thank Troop 851, the Boy Scout troop in town. Spent a Saturday cleaning up City Park. There were 16 scouts and they went from one end to the other, cleaning up the sticks and everything. So I promised them that I would thank them. So I'm thanking them. And if you see any scouts from Troop 851, you can thank them also. So just kind of a little heads up on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. A good deed for sure for the community. And the last person that signed up is Pete Schreierman. Pete?
I just thought I'd take an opportunity tonight. We've been with the implementation or the adoption of that clear water ordinance. We've been fielding a lot of calls. And there's been some confusion and just some people looking for information, but I wanted to share with the council members, so if you're fielding questions, you'd be able to answer this as well. The ordinance comes into effect June 1st, and that isn't the time after June 1st we would inspect for. That would be the time you would need to comply for. So if somebody is having a real estate transaction or a transfer of title, and that is going to occur after June 1st, please contact our office. We'll get you squared away with the inspection process and certification process so that after June 1st, your transaction can be taken care of without a hitch. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, we invite the public to come in and make public comments and/or communicate the same to city officials, aldermen, and the clerk's office, so that any information that isn't quite clear, we can pass along and/or get you answers on as best we can. Moving on, item 4, discussion and possible approval for advanced financing of utility debt. I'll ask Administrator Jurgis to start the discussion and introduce our guest.
Sure, Phil Costin from Ellers is here tonight. You should all remember Phil is our financial debt consultant. And really over the last few weeks, I've been talking with Phil about the possibility to refinance 2006 and 2007 curb debt, which most of that debt is related to TIF projects. And as we previously discussed, a number of our TIFs are struggling with expenses versus revenues, and this is a way to hopefully decrease our expenses a little bit. And then the other thing is at the Finance and Personnel Committee tonight, we did talk a little bit about this, but we also talked about some TIF adjustments in accounting that we did related to some TIF projects that were related to the purchase of the utility land. If there's questions about that at the end of this discussion, I'd be happy to answer those discussions. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Phil to go through his packet.
All right, thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone. It's been a little while since I've been here, and I know that because I had to be reintroduced to one of your council members. Looked a little different than the last time I saw him, I guess. So, nice to be back with you. As Administrator Jurgis alluded to, we've been talking about the possibility of refunding 2 different debt issues, and the 06 issue, just so you're familiar with the use, the original purpose, the 06 curb was 100% TID 4, so any benefit that's derived there would benefit tax increment district number 4. And the 07 issue had a small percent, which was TID 4, and the remaining amount would benefit the utility. So if you did look to refinance these, the savings would be divvied up between, again, those 2 purposes, TID 4 and the utility on a pro rata basis. So I came with 3 different options, and I'm going to be frank with you, I don't know if there's a clear-cut favorite here. This is kind of like the final 4, but it's really the final 3 here, I guess, when we talk about it. We have a clear-cut favorite in the final 4, I hope. So. And I'm going to talk briefly about each of the 3 options, and then we could talk about the numbers. And there's a lot of numbers here, and not everybody's a numbers person, so I try to give you kind of the big picture, then we could dive into the numbers as you would like. But if you just go to the first page in, there's a quick purpose summary on the top of that page, along with a proposed schedule that if you want to proceed, we can proceed under. Option 1 is to keep these as a revenue bond. Right now, these are issued as revenue bonds. They don't count against the city's borrowing capacity. They're fully paid by either the utility and or the tax increment district. None of it falls to the levy. But the key there is it doesn't count against the city's borrowing capacity. When you issue revenue bonds, interest rates are a little bit higher. And as a result of that, the savings will be diminished a little bit. If you recall, we've gone through and over the last 3 years, those of you who have been here, and we've refinanced a couple of revenue bond issues, and you chose to move them to the general obligation, still paid by the revenues of the systems, but to enhance the savings, you move them to the general obligation. There were smaller issues in that case. So option 1 would be to keep these as a revenue bond, combine the 2 together, it'd be 1 debt issue. We show a savings of about $357,000, or around $40,000 a year, and that's a net present value savings of 3.75%. So that merits consideration as a revenue bond. So the $40,000 a year, again, would be, savings would be split between probably the little bit of the majority of it would be TID 4, with the rest going to the utility. Option 2, general obligation bonds. This is like what you've done the last couple of times. You switch it over to general obligation bonds. But this is a large issue, and it will eat up a significant portion of your borrowing capacity, and that raises a few red flags that I want to talk about. So this does enhance the savings for 2 reasons. One, interest rates are a little bit lower, but also, if you recall, when you convert revenue debt to general obligation debt, it frees up this kind of mystery thing called the debt service reserve fund. So when you borrow revenue bonds, you have to borrow a little extra money, and that's security for the bond holders. You hold that money, you invest that money. But when you don't have the revenue bonds outstanding, you could take that debt service reserve and actually downsize the debt that you're going to refinance, and that enhances the savings. You don't have that money to invest anymore, and it kind of goes away, but it reduces debt. So you can see the savings jumps to almost $600,000. A significant portion of that, again, is because you're freeing up that debt service reserve. You lose whatever interest earnings on that, but again, you're able to reduce debt. So that's option 2, and my note under option 2, again, this option uses a significant portion of your outstanding borrowing capacity. As a result of that, I'm not saying it would happen, but there is the possibility you could see a downgrade. And the downgrade would not happen to the utility. The downgrade would happen to the city's rating. So that's a possibility. Option 3, and one thing that Brian and I had talked about, is do we wait? These are what are called advance refundings, meaning they're not callable till 2017. You can still go ahead and refinance them. It's called an advance refunding. But what the analysis I wanted to run was, if you wait till 2017, how much do interest rates have to increase so that you at least have the same savings as you are realizing now, okay? So what that is if you see interest rates rise between now and March of 2017 at less than 0.8%, so a little less than 1%, you will see a savings similar to now or greater. If it rises above the 0.8%, it diminishes the actual savings that you would realize now. So that's another kind of piece of this puzzle as to, do you wait? Do you take the savings now? Do you convert it to GO? All of the above. So if you wait till March 2017, the other negative there is that you lose any savings that you would realize in 2016 and 2017 by doing it now. Okay, so that's the third option that we have out there. So without asking, I guess, for where you stand at the moment, let me just talk a little bit more about the schedule, and then we can discuss it further. If you authorize and give us direction tonight, our plan would be to come back on April 28th with the actual sale results. So typically it's about a month later. In that time, we have a rating call. We would schedule that. It would either be a rating call for the utility or it'd be a rating call for the city. They're separate ratings. And between that time, we would also have prepared an offering document like we've always done in the past as well. So the process and timing doesn't change depending on which option you choose, unless you choose to wait 2 years until they become callable issues. So when they become callable, it reduces 3 different factors. And again, I'm focusing on option 3. When you do an advance refunding, you have some extra fees. And there is a third party, essentially somebody who has to set up the escrow, because you're escrowing funds to pay down the debt that you have over the next couple of years that are not callable. So you pay a fee for somebody, a third party, to do that. And you're borrowing money to pay the portion that is non-callable, 2016 and 27 maturities, at today's rates, which is maybe, just say, use 2%, while you're paying 4% interest. That's called negative arbitrage. So that's why in option 3, we ran the calculation to better determine how much do rates have to move before you start losing the benefit. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you what's going to happen with interest rates. That's not going to happen. You can make your own determination on that. So if you go to page 2 to the analysis real quickly, I'm going to kind of whip through these. I've highlighted the interest rates currently being paid in yellow on these two issues. Again, 5/1/17 is when they're callable. You can see they're between 4 and almost 4.5%. We ran on page 3 the revenue bond refunding analysis, and the first fold-out page that you see is the savings analysis for the revenue bond option. If you go all the way to the far right-hand side, that's the total savings column. Again, that's net of fees, so after you've paid all fees already, that's actual savings to the city. You can see it's future savings of almost $410,000. The actual present net future value savings of $357,000, because there is a little difference in that reserve fund as well. And then I've done the same analysis on page 5 and 6 for the general obligation debt. The last page, though, is what I wanted to focus a little bit on, and this would, again, relate to option number 2, where you would convert this debt. So it's the last page of the packet. You would convert this debt under option 2 to general obligation. So every municipality has the ability to borrow up to 5% of the total value of the community, and that's the same from Milwaukee to Plymouth. Everybody's the same. So I ran a borrowing capacity analysis here real quickly, and then I just assumed you're going to take on the option 2 to see what would happen with how much of the borrowing capacity you would use under option 2. So if you look at under 2015 and kind of follow that all the way across, you have in the middle of the page the city's equalized value, that's EV, is $677 million. And 5% of that is $33,873,000. That's the city's general obligation borrowing capacity. The principal outstanding, which is the column before the city's EV, is at the end of 15 is about 19.4 million, meaning right now, before you do anything, you're at about 57% of your borrowing capacity. That's right now. This is at the end of 15, so after you've made your payments throughout 15. If you select option 2, that bumps you up, and these are always little snapshots in time. You know, you're going to see some growth that'll change it. You're going to pay down debt that changes it. So this is what it would look like. But this is, if we went to a rating call, this is what Moody's will see. They're going to identify in your rating report that this refinancing would be moved to the general obligation debt. That takes you to roughly 80% of your borrowing capacity. And then they'll take it from there as to what that means in their world. Now, we can make the case that this is kind of short-lived, that the city doesn't have any large capital projects on the horizon, and we're going to be paying down, the city's going to be paying down, you know, $2+ million each year in debt. The city's growing. You can make the case for all that stuff. But again, what Moody's is looking at is not just what it does for the city, it's how you rank compared to all other communities your size. So they're going to look at that kind of as a snapshot. Right or wrong is what they're going to do. And I don't know what will happen. I mean, I think there's a chance that it could lead to a downgrade. And that's not the end of the world either, if it's a downgrade. Yeah.
I'm going to throw a curveball at
Yeah.
you. What about a negotiated sale with a bank?
Well, Moody's will do surveillance ratings when they see debt outstanding or any debt being issued. So Moody's will look at everybody's CAFR on an annual basis.
Okay.
And that'll still be an obligation
Okay.
of the city. So they'll come back and they'll do a surveillance rating.
At that point in time.
At that
and
point.
Could change the rating at that.
Yeah, I think it would result in, you know, roughly the same impact, I would guess.
Okay.
So I'm not here to say do one thing or the other. Option 1, 2, or 3 all, to me, make some sense. Option 2 maximizes the savings, jeopardizes a little bit whether or not you'd see a downgrade. Option 1 is probably the safest bet. You lock into savings now. You don't use up your borrowing capacity. And option 3, if you think rates are going to stay flat for the next 2 years, makes sense also. If you believe that we're not gonna see a rate, any rate adjustment over the next couple of years, or a very modest increase in interest rates, then that would make sense as well. So as I said, I think we have, unfortunately, probably three pretty viable options here. All have some pros and cons.
I have a question. Phil,
Yeah.
On the last page, would it be accurate or somewhat accurate to say, if we look out to 2018, under the percent of borrowing capacity we have today, it drops about 20 points. Would we be back around the 60 if we decided to do option 2 by 2018? Or something close to that? I mean, is the 80% really kind of it's a short-term issue?
Yeah, it's a short-term issue. Now, the two things that would impact that would be, does the city take on other debt? Do you have other capital out there? Because that adds to it. And then the other factor is how quickly you're paying down your debt. You can kind of see what that looks like here. And then what growth do you see? Now, in this analysis, I use 1% growth a year. I hope that's conservative. So if you see faster growth, that's a higher equalized value, more debt capacity. So all those play into it, but I would guess probably more in the 19 range.
Okay.
Yeah. If you didn't take on more debt, in that range.
Councilman Hanson.
and I'm not sure if I'm gonna understand this correctly or not, but the $357,000 for item 1, or option 1, and option 2 is $596,000. That money would be used to pay down the TIF?
Pays down the
Potential or-
actual debt that you're issuing.
It's
So-
the savings for the TIF,
Yeah,
primarily.
primarily.
So
Or-
does
or the
that-
utility.
We get a better rating or TIF, does that affect the overall rating of the city or not? Because if you reduce debt, or doesn't it factor that much?
I don't think so.
That's gonna have negligible impact. I mean, one thing that Moody's has really switched, or changed their practices, I would say 5 to 10 years ago, you can make a strong case that debt that was, general obligation debt that was self-supporting from another source of revenue debt, TIF debt, special assessment paid, wherever the money was coming from, didn't really, fall into the borrowing capacity analysis. They discount that now. They just kind of say debt is debt. And the reality is, if you don't have the money come from the TIF, you don't have the money come from the utility, you're gonna levy for it. So they've changed their practice a little bit, so I don't think that would have much impact. So just to your point, though, we would be able to, again, downsize the debt between option 1 and option 2 because we're using that debt service reserve under option 2. So the amount that would be issued under option 1 would be about $8,650,000, and option 2 would be a little over $7.9 million. So the difference between those two is primarily using that debt service reserve to kind of draw, buy down the debt under option 2.
Alderman Zlachek.
You said that option 1 would save about $40,000 a year. Is there a number for option 2?
Oh, yeah, it's about $135,000 a year. Yep. Yeah, it's the second fold-out page on the end. You'll see it's about $135,000 to $140,000 a year, so it is substantial.
Alderman Hanson
What is
again.
our rating now?
It's interesting. I was just thinking about that as I was standing here. I should have probably looked it up. I think you're A1, I believe. AA3 or A1?
AA3.
AA3, and then the
AA3.
utility's A1, I believe.
I think
Yeah,
that's what it is.
yeah.
And to that extent, in our last bonding adjustment that you did, was that not the first time that they didn't classify us as, cheese capital of the world only?
More diversified,
Little add-on.
little more
Yeah,
diversified,
a little
yeah.
more. They took out,
Yeah.
that distinction, which
concentration of
we
food
seem to
industry
be
or whatever,
always
yeah.
hovering over, so
Yeah.
they let us appear more diversified.
Yeah.
Okay. Alderman Nelson.
How is this related to the discussion we had in the earlier meeting tonight about the TID utility debt and all that?
Well, most of the savings, it's not broken out between the two issues, but most of the savings is gonna be savings for TIF number 4. Most of the savings, which, again, for 2000, for this calendar year, we estimated, I think, $340,000 more in expenses than revenue. We had $250,000 of fund balance, so overall, we had a $90,000 deficit. We're transferring some unspent funds back. We would be, those unspent 07 bond proceeds would be are being transferred back over, so that'll cover us, help us with the shortfalls for at least 2 years, I
Yeah.
would say. So
Shortfalls in the
that's
TIF.
gonna happen
Yeah.
either way. The question still comes back, so that's gonna happen either way. The question is do you wanna refinance the existing 06, 07 issues, and if so, you wanna do it on a revenue basis or a geo basis?
I have a question for Phil. What are you currently seeing in some of your latest bond offerings for other communities? Obviously, there's a rating difference and everything else, but
Yeah, well,
I guess where are they coming in at this point?
you know, Mayor, if you look at the two different options, the two different pull-out pages, these are reflective of both the general obligation comparisons that we see and revenue bond comparisons, and that's why we pull these. So on page 4, which is the first fold-out page, these are the revenue bond scale. And if you look all the way on the far right-hand side, under proposed 15 issue, those are the rates that we're projecting. So 0.9 to 2.5%. My guess for that 10-year issue would be somewhere in the range of cumulatively maybe about a little over 2, but not much. And then if you go to page 6 and look at the same scale, the same spot, this is general obligation, so 0.55 to 2.25. So, you know, it's about a quarter to a little over a 1/4% higher if you do a revenue bond on rates. And I would think you'd be well under 2% in that scenario.
I mean, that's significant because we're at 4 now.
Yeah.
plus.
If there was obviously this would be expensive because it would be a fee, but if there was a downgrade, we could pull the sale.
We could pull the sale.
So I mean, that would, and
Yep.
that wouldn't, then what happens? Does that bond rating go away?
That goes away. Yep.
So that would be another option, but the cost of that bond rating is what, 8,500, 10 grand?
Yeah, you're gonna have about
So
a,
you'd
yeah,
take a hit
that's
for
who
that.
you get, that's who's gonna, I mean, they're gonna go through the analysis, they're gonna prepare a report, you can not accept the report essentially, but they're gonna still charge you a fee.
Right.
It's
So,
10,000, roughly
I mean, that-
10,000.
I just want to bring that
Yep.
up, that
That's
that
correct.
could be an option, that you could go through the bond rating for option 2. If it was a downgrade, you could say, we're scrapping this and,
Right.
and going back to option 1, you could do.
And we talked about, do we try to get Moody's on kind of a, you know, guidance, to provide some guidance as to where I just, our experience with them recently is that that's not something they're gonna give you as much of an outlook as you're looking for. They're gonna give you a lot of wishy-washy, possibly, I'm not sure, we have to analyze it, gotta take it to committee, I've heard it all way too many times. So I don't think guidance is gonna be the direction, but, you know, that would be another option.
If we go for the gusto and option 2 and look at almost double, triple
Yeah.
the potential savings, and our worst case cost is to decline it and spend $10,000, it almost seems like the odds are in our favor to really look at it at the big bite at this point with the rates in 30 days. They're not going to go through the roof, one would think, not where they are now. Comments, questions? Alderman Zlachek, then Alderman Markham.
I want to go back to what Alderman Markham asked about, you know, in 2018, you know, we're going to be at 37%, 39, 38%. That 80.8, is that gonna go down, like you said? And if it does, okay, and we're back to the 60, or a little less maybe, that would change our bond rating if we were to finance. If we were gonna need to finance at that time, our bond rating would go up based on having dropped back down to where we are now.
So, that's a possibility, yeah. And just quick math, because I don't like doing quick math in front of everybody, but, you know, if you think about, okay, your existing debt, just using 2018 as the number you're focused on.
Right.
Roughly 38%.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have paid off, under option 2.
Okay.
Through, at the end of 2018, you would have paid off another about 950,000 of the other issue.
Okay.
Which is maybe a little less than 15% of that issue. You would still be probably at drop 20, 35. Yeah, you'd probably be about 50 to 60% in that range of capacity. Now you're going to probably take on a few other smaller projects and borrow a little bit of money. So you'd probably be back to 60 to 65%, I would guess, by 2018. And the part of the issue is you're not paying off much principal on that new issue until the other bonds are callable portion kick in. So in 16 and 17, you're paying off the minimum loan. It's 18 we really hit it. So I think you'd be back to probably around 60% ballpark.
Alderman Markham?
Administrator Yerges. You know, we've been looking at our TID deficits the last few years. Would this alleviate some of that issue that looming thing in the future that?
Well, it'll help. I mean, I've been looking at this since day one. I mean, there was a point where in day one, 5 years ago, the total cumulative deficits got to like 2 million or something like that for TIF number 4 alone or something like that. But over time, we've had a little bit of development. I think with the unspent 07 bond proceeds being shifted over to fund balance, that's going to help us for 2 years. Then we, either way, there's going to be some savings from the bond refinancing. And then that coupled with the Oshkosh cold storage, the NDRACE project, and the GTS Glacier expansion, that's going to add value to the TIF and should improve the cash flow of the TIF. But at the same time, when you look at the TIF debt, I think the TIF debt for TIF 4 is 1.8 million. Over the next couple of years, it goes to 2 million. So, I mean, the existing TIF debt they're still projected to increase. So, I mean, I can't sit there and tell you that this is going to alleviate all the problems, because I don't think it will. But it's either way, it'll help improve things. And the biggest unknown is, what are those projects going to be valued at? And we just don't know. That we had no development agreements with any of those projects, as we weren't providing any development incentives. So.
Any other questions? Alderman Hanson?
Before we maybe go into motion on this, do we have any capital debts that we foresee that are gonna be large? I mean, you can't predict the unknowns, but.
Not on the city side, that's kind of what we talked a little bit, we're paying off the state, or the landfill loan. We're paying that off. That's not part of Phil's projection, but I think that's like 400,000. So we had planned on paying that off this year. My gut tells me that I don't see us having a huge problem with the 2016 budget and the 2017 budget for capital projects and needing to borrow any. Not knowing what future state budgets are going to be, in the 2018 to 2020, it's hard to know. But I mean, there again, that the overall debt capacity we're using does decrease significantly over that time period. So at the end of the day, I guess, how comfortable are you with saying we're not really gonna be adding a lot of debt over the next, call it 5 years, 4 years, on the city side? I wouldn't worry about the utility side, because we always have the option of, if needed, to borrow on a curb basis in the future. But it's really on the city side, and, we're not building a city hall, we're not building a new fire station, we already did that project, we're not building an aquatic center, so I guess, looking at that and the fact that the principal is decreasing by 2 million a year, and, between 16 and 21, I guess, you're using a lot of your capacity, but it's really risk reward, and how comfortable are you with that level? I mean, started out the conversation, I don't know that there's a wrong answer. What are you most comfortable with? I mean, I personally, I wouldn't like it, as an administrator, we go through the debt rating and we have a debt rating decrease. I wouldn't be happy with that personally.
But then we can turn it down too. Bill?
Yeah. One thing, that I see out there, you asked about Green borrowing, and it's being discussed is the mill pond, the dam, the levee, the whole, we can, if we really want to do a big project, and I'm not sure what all that big a project will be, but, with the dam study being done, we have to bring the dam to compliance. We really don't have a number, but there's other options. But just to, if we wanted to go in the direction of spending a lot of money at the mill pond and the dam and the fence, things like that, I mean, I could see that in the next 5, maybe 10, but.
Yeah, that's 5 to 10 years out.
But that'd be the only.
Right, and that's where you're back to this percentage.
I see when I look at what's being discussed, we could always spend it in streets too, but.
Notwithstanding a catastrophe, we're at our 80% July 4th, middle of the year, if this goes through. And we reduce that within 12 months, realistically, to probably a 75, which increases our capacity again, but we've never been at our capacity.
We do have a financial policy that it's either 60 or 65%. I can't remember the exact one, that normally we don't exceed that.
Yeah.
But we did do it the last time when we refinanced the utility debt to GEO, and that's because we said we weren't adding new money to it, and we had savings, and it was in our best interest. So, we do have a policy that kind of says we don't want to go over that 60 to 65% range in general.
The short-term
That's a
turnaround
self-imposed
certainly
policy.
gives us the risk reward we're talking about. And, okay, the chair will open it up to a motion of option 1, 2, or 3 and see where it goes.
Mr. Mayor, I think, I want to make a motion that we go with option 2, with the caveat that if our bond rating changes, that we can pull it, like we discussed, and maybe go back then to option 1. And I agree with Administrator I guess I would hate to see our bond rating change, but it's hard to deny the savings that are there on an annual basis. There's short-term pain, but there's very much long-term benefit to doing something like this.
Do we have a second for discussion?
Second.
We have a first and second discussion on the motion. I think that's a very good approach from an analytical standpoint and a short term. If we had to run that risk for 10 years to see that benefit, I think that's a different subject matter. Alderman Zlotchek?
When they do that and they see that 80, do they look at the fact that it's going to drop back down in a short period of time?
They'll ask follow-up questions as to what capital projects are on the horizon, and they'll ask questions about stresses that the city may be under already. TIF is a stress, obviously, so this will impact that. So I think there's pros and cons there that you can follow up. I just, this is a little bit unusual situation. We rarely go to rating with the idea of possible rejecting. So prior to, and we can go that direction. I'm not saying we can't, but we're going to have an early discussion with Moody's to kind of give them a heads up of what is being contemplated. And it'll have to go probably to the new head of the Chicago office, who's brand new and I don't know very well. So it'll be a good starting point discussion with them. But I just, we may end up at the end of the day, and I'll have Brian certainly participate with me on that call. Maybe the outcome is that's the direction you give us. I'm just being upfront here.
No,
and then at the end of the day, we have that conversation and they say, this isn't good, this isn't appropriate, it's not gonna work, we're not gonna pull it back, whatever. If that's the case, we'll have to kind of pivot and come back and figure out the next step. Is that fair? I mean,
Brian, are you okay with that approach? Are you comfortable, or is that, are you uncomfortable with that?
Again, I would not want to do anything that jeopardizes our bond rating. There is significant savings there. Again, I feel comfortable with the 2016 and 17 budget years. What I can't speak to is 2018 and 2019, because I just don't know where things are going to end up.
So, Phil, if I understand it correctly, part of the story with the call with Moody's is explaining our position very well and telling them what's on the horizon, what we think is going to happen, and that plays into it. It isn't just a numbers thing.
No, I mean, what we'll put together and more analysis than this, it'll show, I think we'll have to work closely with staff to put together kind of maybe it's a very rough 5-year capital plan that we can then insert into this as well.
We have a 10-year capital plan.
Okay, and insert that into this to show kind of what the long range, plan is as far as debt capacity. So I think, we will certainly do whatever we possibly can to soften that number and to explain that it's a blip. It's it's kind of a one-time impact, and then the hope is it'll drop back down to a more reasonable number.
Question for you, Phil. Does it, as part of the motion, we've got the caveat to pull it, and we all understand that. They're going to look at our motion and our minutes and read that. Does that add or subtract any
They're not going to look
thinking
at that.
capacity at all?
No,
They're
not,
strictly
they don't, no,
with
they're,
what we're looking at.
The nice thing here from your standpoint is that this is revenue debt. So, and you're refinancing debt. If you're issuing bonds for the firehouse, you couldn't even have this discussion. You gotta,
Exactly.
It's a very formal process. Federal law and state law require you to adopt resolutions that specify exact. This is different. These are revenue bonds. So we have some flexibility in how we kind of approach this. But Moody's, I don't think ever gets into the weeds where they're actually reading minutes of meetings.
Okay.
Maybe they are, I don't know, but they do read local newspapers, I know that. So anyway, it's just, we see each other a lot, so. They do read local papers once in a while, but usually they're not looking for what was the motion at the city council meeting. They're looking at a closing of a facility, or, they're looking at big picture kind of.
Well, our
impacting
trend,
the community.
Our trend is very positive from the last 4 years. I mean, and we got our rating back, which disappeared many years ago, and our reserve position, even on the city side, is substantially better.
I'm trying to recall the last rating we did for the city. I know we did one for the utility a couple of years back. Was it 2 years ago about? Was it 3 years now? 2 years, I think?
We did one in 2013.
Well, no, that was utility.
Well, we refinanced.
The curb.
Yeah.
We refinanced the curb.
Yeah, I think
as
what
a-
I'd like to do is also go back and look at the last rating and just kind of get a perspective on, what, they always identify what can move a rating up and down on these.
Exactly.
It might be good to just glance at as well, and we could talk about it.
Okay. Any other questions? Clerk will call the roll on the motion.
Williams,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Fernsler,
Yes.
Hildebrand,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Fowler,
Yes.
Sedlacek,
Yes.
Markham,
Yes.
Motion carried. Administrator Yurgis.
I'm just curious if the council thinks it's worth a second motion to also, authorize myself to approve moving forward on a revenue basis if our preliminary discussion with Moody's is a negative discussion. So that if they give us the indication right off the bat that, this is something we'd have great concern about, well, then maybe we shouldn't even worry with the $10,000 rating.
I think that makes
Are you
sense.
okay with the judgment call on that, and you want to make a motion on that or of some sort, or?
How about can we amend the motion and
No.
add that? It's already done. Okay.
I'm thinking it should be a separate.
Then I think we should have a separate motion.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'll make a second motion that if the call with Moody's does not sound favorable, and that our bond rating would probably be changed, that we give the administrator, Yurgis, discretion on moving forward with option one.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any questions on the motion? Clerk will call. Oh, 1 second. Alderman Sedlacek.
So, if we get a bad review, and we'd be doing what we would, if he were to come in here and say, yeah, this 80%, that's gonna, kill your bond rating, we'd be doing one anyway.
We'd fall back to
Yes.
1 anyway.
And I just wanted to kind of
Yeah.
make sure that that's, okay.
Any other question?
I have
Phil?
one comment. Given how kind of crunch this time frame is, it always is for us to prepare everything and get it to Moody's in time so they can review everything. I foresee where there's a possibility this could get pushed back 2 weeks. If we decide to pivot and go revenue, I could see us maybe having to push it back, just to make you aware.
I don't think that's
We'll
the
talk
worst
about
thing.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it is, it is,
Yeah.
but it's still, the fallback is still a good deal. Okay. Any other questions? Clerk will call the roll on motion 2.
Markham,
Yes.
Sedlacek,
Yes.
Fowler,
Yes.
Hanson, Hildebrand,
Yes.
Fernsler,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you.
Phil.
We'll be in touch.
We try to keep you busy, so. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, resolution. Resolution number 9, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Plymouth opposing elimination of the local government property insurance fund. Administrator Yurgis, you want to give us
Yeah,
a brief
and-
summary on that? Thank you, Phil.
And this. Can I just borrow this? Yeah, this is a resolution that is being circulated by the League of Municipalities, which we are a member of, and, it's just a resolution that we would like to share with our local state legislators that the city of Plymouth basically is in favor to keeping the local government property insurance fund program. We've been part of that for many, many years, and in general, those rates are more competitive and a better deal for the city taxpayers than going to the open market. If this fund is eliminated, at this point, we may be faced going to the open market. I think there may be a Wisconsin Counties Association insurance company that we could potentially look at. But in general, I would anticipate that our insurance would go up compared to today's cost. So many municipalities that are currently in the program are passing similar resolutions to keep the fund open at this time.
Thank you,
That's the
Administrator Yurgis.
request.
Huber, do you have anything to add to that?
I also included the letter from Cities and Villages Mutual Insurance Company, CIVMIC, on their position on this, and they are looking into options because the majority of the members do have insurance through the local government property insurance fund, and they're working diligently to come up with a plan that might serve the members, but as of yet, they do not have anything on that, but they're working on it.
Thank you. The chair will entertain a motion on resolution number 9 as indicated. Alderman Hanson.
I move to approve resolution 9 as printed.
Second, Alderman Nelson.
We have a first and a second to approve resolution 9 of 2015 as printed, and a reminder once again that these are on our website for the public to view ahead of time as well. Any discussion? I would maybe add that at last night's county exec meeting in Sheboygan, of some 23 local officials, there was unanimous agreement to also, as we're looking at this tonight, to oppose the elimination of the state government property fund. So that was discussed last night, and it was across the board unanimous, big and small. So, any other comments? Clerk will call the roll on resolution number 9.
Williams,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Fernsler,
Yes.
Hildebrand,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Fowler,
Yes.
Sedlacek.
Yes.
Markham.
Yes.
Motion carried, thank you. Item 7 is not needed, no items were removed from the consent agenda. Moving on, item 8, committee reports and actions. Item A, Finance and Personnel Committee, discussion and possible action regarding wage adjustment for part-time officer David Kniffel. And I would ask Finance Chairman Markham to make a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to increase the hourly wage rate for our part-time officer, David Kneffel, to $16.44 an hour, as we discussed in the Personnel Finance Committee and approved in the committee tonight.
Second, Alder Williams.
We have a first and a second to increase the part-time officer pay to $16.44 an hour. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Who said that? Alderman Sedlacek.
Does the, how many hours per week is the part-time?
Chief?
It would be depending upon how, there is no set hours, it's
Okay.
on a need basis. He works full-time for Brown County Sheriff's Department, and he would like to work 3 or 4 shifts a month if possible. with
Oh,
his schedule.
okay.
And the times he would be working would be later in the evening, like 7 AM to 3 PM, maybe
Okay.
5 at night till 1 in the morning. filling our shift.
Because my question is, does this fit within the budget for salary?
It fits, yes, in the ordinance, it's in the range, actually.
Well, but I'm saying in terms of how much we
We
budgeted.
budgeted this year, $2,500 for those part-time positions. When we get near that, we won't work them anymore, or depending upon the need,
Okay.
we would come back to the council to look at additional funding if required, but I don't anticipate that.
Okay.
Administrator Jurgens?
Yeah, one of the discussions at the committee level that you weren't participating in was that there's some FMLA issues that we're dealing with, and so this will help us with those situations, so.
Alderman Hanson.
Doesn't this also come in compliance with another part-time?
Yes, the other
Yeah.
part-time officers making $16.44 an hour.
Good point. Any other questions? Clerk will call the roll, please.
Markham.
Yes.
Sedlacek.
Yes.
Fowler,
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
Hildebrand,
Yes.
Fernsler,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion carried, thank you. Item 9, old business, update and discussion regarding railroad hearing on Western Milwaukee Street, Western Avenue, Milwaukee Street crossing. I'll call on Council President Hanson to start the discussion.
I have some questions as far as who coordinates what's going on with the railroad because of the open session or the public hearing. And at the March 10th meeting, the council moved unanimously to submit alternate B to the Office of Commissioner Railroads not to exceed $150,000 as the alternate if needed to keep the crossing opened. And then after the testimony by some of our city officials, I was confused by what direction we're going. Because we said alternate B, if we needed to use it, $150,000. We'd like to leave it the way it was if possible, but that doesn't sound like a very safe way of doing it. So I guess I'm gonna, and I haven't talked to any of these persons on it, so I'm gonna put them on the spot a little bit tonight. But I'm gonna ask kind of in order that they presented their public hearing information, if they would summarize their input with regards to the council motion request to keep the Milwaukee Railroad crossing open. And I'm gonna ask Administrator Jurgis to, state his.
Well, I'm not sure if I know exactly what the question is. I mean,
What I'm looking at is that, was your testimony in regards that you wanted to keep the crossing open as directed by the council?
well, yeah, I mean, there was, obviously you were there, there was testimony given from a variety of perspectives, the city, WSOR, OCR, and DOT, and, in terms of cross-examination, I guess you could call it, and asking questions, I asked direct questions to those that were giving testimony, but in terms of the city's position, that we wanted to keep it open, and I did present the alternative of the, I guess you would call it intersection realignment of Western Milwaukee with not to exceed 150,000, and not, I didn't bring Elizabeth in, if that's what you're
I guess
asking.
I'm going that particular direction, yes. And then, Mr. Emick, your testimony, and you're under oath when you spoke about this, and it's kind of like, I was kind of surprised how formal it was myself when they did this part, but they swear into these particular parts. And, what was your input in regards to the council's request to keep this open?
Well,
And I probably should ask each of you ahead of time, but.
we talked about, there was a big discussion about the crossing being closed. The railroad brought in their consultant who recommended being closed because the wigwags are antiquated and the geometry is really bad. And then we talked, Brian discussed it, and I discussed it with the commissioner's representative. We understand there are some problems, but there hasn't been any historical crashes. If we can remove the rails to the south of the existing main line and do some grading, the DOT presented their plan of putting in signals with wigwags, with gates, not wigwags. So, the fact is that, my big push was that, if we get rid of the rails and make it less of it, it's gonna be steep, but it's not gonna be as steep. The signals with the gates are gonna be safer than what's out there today. And another thing we did discuss with the railroad commissioner guy was that either our pedestrians that do use that crossing, and if it's closed, if they can't cross there, that'll be an issue for businesses in the area, as well as the kids that are walking back and forth. So that was kind of the route we were pursuing, and that was the route we were kind of directed to pursue. And the truth is, it didn't, and I think we kind of told you, the chance of this being open, the railroad office does this is, 10 to 20% that it would. And, just, I'm sure all of you sat there thinking like, well, this is not going well for the city if we want to keep it open. And we did talk about it's an alteration to the intersection. Yeah, Plan B.
Plan B.
And presented that, and that's kind of that's pretty much where it went up to me.
Okay. And then, I didn't talk to any of you before this evening about this, so I kind of put you in the spot. Jerry Thompson, I didn't know if he's going to come or not, and I didn't ask him to come, but he also gave testimony on it, and he's our railroad commissioner. And I was going to ask if I got that correct? Coordinator, excuse me, I'm sorry. Railroad coordinator. And I was going to ask him what his input into it was. And then I'm going to ask Mayor Pullman, your input into would you summarize your input regards to the council's request to keep the Milwaukee River crossing open?
Well, I guess I'm a little surprised at the line of questioning, Councilmember Hanson. If you want to ask me a direct question, go ahead and ask me a direct question and not beat around the bush. They had two expert people testify. One that was hired by WSOR, one that was hired by the commission itself, an investigator. In very short answers, they responded to close the intersection. There was no hesitation in their voice. In railroad speak terms, that means it's over with. It's a done deal. I was the last to testify, and what I tried to convey was an alternate to be considered for, in lieu of closing the existing crossing and giving us some time and leeway to submit additional documentation to further present the alternative to moving the intersection to the north, or northwest. And I believe that the commissioner understood that, and in earlier discussion this evening, we have approximately 60 days to submit additional information, and in the meantime, I would assume that Administrator Jurgis will be talking, has talked, as he indicated this evening earlier, with Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Jared was the name that was mentioned, and then continue conversation with the railroad persons to be named by them, and come to hopefully some agreement within the boundary terms that have been outlined by the council for participation for a revised North Milwaukee Western Avenue. And to that extent, I think we'll be successful in that effort, and we're moving toward that conclusion. I do believe, hearing the testimony, that at this point, that crossing is closed, period. When you have two experts say it, and we have no experts other than our heartfelt opinions to keep it open, you're in a hearing. That's a trial. We didn't do well in the trial. So we're looking at alternatives. And I think, in that regard, we're moving in the right direction. And I think Administrator Yurgis can make these arrangements and have these discussions and keep the council informed. And hopefully, we will move that intersection to the alternative format that we discussed at council.
I didn't want to ask anybody any direct questions because I wanted to get your input on it. What I realize in my years on the council, that Mayor, you were very instrumental in getting the railroad here. And you've worked that for a long particular period of time. And your ownership is well noted, how much that you care about this particular point on it. And then Jerry Thompson is, I did call him a commissioner, but Jerry Thompson gives the input and gives us updates through email on what's going on in the railroad building and things like this. And where I have my concern on it, I guess, is that who is the person coordinating this? And I guess I would like City Administrator Yurgis to continue to be the lead person on this and possibly send a letter or notification to the DOT and to the railroad WSOR and OCR that he is the lead person and negotiations should be going strictly through him. Not that we don't want your Jerry Thompson's or Bill Emmons or your input into it, but I think that Administrator Yurgis should be the lead person in this. And so that is why I'm kind of confused about how it does go about, but so that's what I'd like to have take place on it. You know, I guess what is going to happen with this crossing? Isn't it closed? If we don't act on it and have one person, you know, as united group on this, it'll be probably closed. And then the other ad lib on this is that what's going to happen to Clifford Street, what's going to happen to South Milwaukee, Highland, and Pleasant View? What's going to happen to those particular crossings? And that's why I really believe we need to have, you know, one person, and I'm not saying Jerry Thompson, I'm not saying Bill, and I'm not saying Mayor that you aren't doing a great job with the particular basis, but I believe that it needs to come with one front area on that. And that's.
I think it's well understood that Administrator Yurgis is going to lead the discussion and keep us informed. Administrator Yurgis.
Yeah, I mean, to give the council an update, which this is what I gave at the Finance and Personnel Committee, is that Bill Emmons and I did meet with Jared from DOT today, and we just wanted confirmation in writing that this realigned crossing, that's our option B that we've proposed, that if that happens or is ordered, confirmation in writing that the signal money from DOT will be there. And basically the verbal acknowledgement is he expected yes, but he needs to confer with his supervisor. And then I asked him, can we get a letter within 10 days? And he said that shouldn't be a problem. So we're expecting a letter on that yes, DOT will pay for the signals for the realignment if approved by the OCR office. We then asked, a second question is if it's ordered closed, but then the city petitions for a new crossing, which could include closing Elizabeth and assuming Milwaukee Street, or that crossing's closed, and another realigned crossing. He was unclear whether the signal money would be there for that other option. But they were going to discuss that. He did say that it could possibly be there if it was ordered closed, and then immediately thereafter, if we filed another petition for a new crossing, that potentially timelines would match up for there to still be DOT funding to participate in a project. So that's what we talked about with DOT. As the mayor indicated, he did forward an email on to me about a proposed meeting with WSOR, and we provided WSOR with 3 meeting dates here in April and are waiting confirmation. So that's the only update I have. And again, I want to be very clear that, you know, coming into this, Bill and I have said consistently that, you know, the probability that this is going to be closed is a high probability. you know, so I mean, we're not changing that perspective. We didn't know that going into the hearing.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I think
Alderman
one other
Markham?
question, and I did speak to it a little bit in the Personnel and Finance Committee. I agree with you, Charlie. I think it's extremely important that we know the chances are slim, but it is important that we're speaking with one voice that's very loud, that's saying, this is the outcome that we really want. I mean, that's the only way that if there's a chance we're gonna get it done, that we continue to sing all the same tune, and that, you know, there aren't other options thrown out there unless, you know, we can discuss as a council that we're comfortable with those two. So I agree, Brian's the right one to coordinate it. He's the one leading the pack on this, and we're behind him saying, this is the outcome that we'd really like to have, and to stand up to him and say, you know, we'll fight for this outcome. We're not just gonna cave in and say, just because, you know, you're the railroad, we have to do whatever you say. So I agree with you, Charlie. I think we're going down the right path. Brian's the right guy to lead it, coordinate it, and make sure we're singing with one voice.
But I do want to say again, Mayor, that you're instrumental in getting the railroad to Plymouth, to Sheboygan Falls, and that was quite a feat.
Well, thank you, and we all want economic opportunity for growth in the community, and we only get that by working with the businesses and each other, and that includes the state and the railroad. So we'll get there, and we'll keep chucking away. Stay on track. Alderman Fowler.
Well, I think the one point that we've been missing is that the people that live north of that railroad track are going to get reduced emergency treatment. And I think maybe we need to get a cardiologist and a neurologist to say, what is the difference, 30 seconds, 1 minute in treatment if somebody were to have a cardiac arrest or a stroke north of there, and they would delay their treatment by, it could be 5 minutes, depending on traffic and stuff. And I think that's why it should be kept open.
Any other comments? Thank you all. Keep lines of communication open, and as soon as Administrator Jurgens gets information, I'm sure he'll pass that along to us and keep us informed through a memo. Thank you. Moving on, item 10. Chair will entertain a motion to go into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, paren 1, paren G, conferring with legal counsel, as this is regarding our claim for excessive assessment from RCG Plymouth LLC.
So moved, Alderman Markham.
Second, Alder Hanson.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion on going in closed session? Clerk will call the roll.
Fowler?
Yes.
Fernsler?
Yes.
Markham?
Yes.
Hanson?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Sedlacek?
Yes.
Hildebrand?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Let the record show we're now back in open session. Next item on the agenda is number 13, discussion and action regarding claim against the city from Sharon Struve in the amount of $2,980. The chair will entertain a motion.
I'll move that we deny the claim of $2,980 by Sharon Struve.
Second, Hildebrand.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? Clerk will call the roll. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we should read into the record Thomas Mann's comments from Sibnick. Thank you.
From Tom Mann, Civic Insurance. I am in receipt of the above claim from Sharon Struve that has been filed against the city of Plymouth in the amount of $2,980. The claimant has alleged that the city failed to properly inspect her residence, and as a result, she has incurred costs to correct the improper inspection. There are two portions of the damage claim, one structural damage claims $2,544, and the other dealing with moving a water softener damage claimed $436. I have discussed both these issues with Pete Scheuerman, and I am giving you my recommendation based on the information I have received from Pete. Regarding the damage from the water softener, it would be my recommendation that this portion of the claim be denied. It is my understanding that there is no permit required to install a water softener, and there is no inspection required by the city. The city has no way of knowing whether a homeowner installs a water softener, so there is no way for the city to verify if the installation meets code. The installation could have been done by a prior owner, a contractor, or even a friend or relative, and the city would have no way of knowing whether this was installed properly. As far as structure damage, Pete did indicate to me that at the time of the build, he did discuss and verify with a representative at Wausau Homes that this prefab did indeed meet the minimum requirements. Since the claimant was installing granite countertops, it would be my guess that this company would want more than the minimum requirements to make sure that they were not exposed to any potential liability in the event that there was an issue with the weight of the counters. As such, they would want to make sure that the homeowner had more than minimum requirements to protect themselves from potential liability. In addition, one could argue that there is negligence on the part of the homeowner. Since this homeowner was not the original owner, that she should have had an inspection prior to the purchase of her home. If she did have an inspection done, one could argue that there is negligence on the part of the inspector for failing to point this out to the sale of the property. As such, it is my recommendation that this portion of the claim also be denied. And that is also the opinion of our city attorney. I had an email confirming that from her also.
Good, thank you. Okay, any further discussion before we call for the roll? Clerk will call the roll.
Nelson,
Yes.
Hildebrand,
Yes.
Fowler,
Yes.
Markham,
Yes.
Fernsler, Hanson,
Yes.
Sedlacek,
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion carried, thank you. Chair, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Alderman. Second, Alderman Hanson.
We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?